Hello, and welcome to the Growth Drive Hot Seat. I'm your host, George Sandman, founder and CEO of Growth Drive, and Growth Drive is the #1 best-selling business advising system. From the hot seat, you're going to hear from your fellow senior business advisors as they get naked and share truths about client engagements and running a thriving advisory business. Now, I'm the author of The Growth Driving Advisor, Proven Strategies for Leading Businesses from Stuck to Best in Class, and this book is written based on my experiences working with over 1,000 business advisors like you on thousands and thousands of business cases. Published by Forbes and available on Amazon and Kindle. Here's what you're going to learn. Every 2 weeks, we're going to put an advisor in the hot seat, and we're going to get topics answered about winning engagements, how we tackle the things we see in those engagements, about running a thriving advisory business, new and proven business models, and open mic. You can submit your topics, and we will have our guests answer them online. We publish every 2 weeks. Never miss an episode. You can subscribe, like, and share on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. Here's your next episode. Hi, and welcome to the Growth Drive podcast. My name is George Sandman, and I am the founder of Growth Drive. And today we have our first guest. This is our inaugural podcast. And our guest is Steve and Cummings of Rizolve Partners. And welcome, Steve. I'm happy to have you.
Thank you, George.
Excellent. And Steve, if you could describe for our listeners what it is that you and Rizolve provide to the market and to your clients.
For sure. So, Steve Cummings, pleased to be here, George. Thank you for the invite. I'm the managing partner of Rizolve Partners, which is a Toronto-based firm operating in North America. We provide services to lower mid-market clients. So the size of clients that we operate with are approximately $5 to $50 million of revenue, not exclusively, but that type of range. And we provide business owners and potentially CEOs as well, but more specifically business owners with value growth services leading into a liquidity event. So we couple value growth with exit planning for the business owner that needs to transition in a 3 to 5 year period.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks. And thanks for providing the revenue range. That's really helpful to help people orient around the segment of the market that you serve. And so during this podcast, we're going to talk about a couple of concepts, and I'll simply highlight them. Their strategic capacity, right, which is a business's ability to execute a strategy towards their goals, right? And really, strategic capacity refers to whether or not the business has the people, the cash, and the processes in place to achieve a stated strategic goal. And we'll talk about that in the context of the 3 dimensions of business growth, which very briefly, these are detailed in my book. The 3 dimensions of business growth are creating predictable profits and cash flow, predictable, sustainable growth, and the 3rd dimension is predictable, transferable value. So Steve and I are going to have a conversation within that context, and that will be the context for this podcast in future sessions as well. So thanks, Steve. I was hoping that we could start the conversation with if you'd be willing to share some experiences you've had out in the market working with clients when they come to you with a specific problem, and how do you qualify the clients? What are your personal qualifying characteristics, if you're willing to share, and how do you start the process of working with them, get them on the path they need to get on?
For sure. So just zeroing in on the qualification criteria, which I think is important. So we work with business owners. So the first qualification hurdle that we look at is the business owner himself, and whether we are convinced that the business owner is coachable such that we can move him to positive action in the future which may be outside of his comfort zone, maybe. And so we need to we need to see that the business owner is motivated, perhaps has a particular reason to move in the direction that we talk about, and indeed is coachable as well. So that would be the first criteria. The second criteria would be, is the business itself in a position that we believe we can help them? So we glibly talk about $5 million of revenue, and really the only reason for that lower hurdle is to make sure that they have, shall we say, the strategic capacity, the current strategic capacity to be able to change their current paradigm to more of a three-dimensional value growth situation. So the size of the company is important. And I think the third factor is, what have they built today? What are the strengths and weaknesses of the business? And is that a reasonable enough foundation for growth? So I'll give you a particular example on that.
Right.
If a client has a loss-making business, we typically would not get involved with that client, because ultimately we're looking to increase the current value of the business, and we need to see profits and cash flow being generated so that we can improve the current situation. So I think they would probably be the three main criteria: coachability, size, and the appraisal of how of the foundation for growth today.
Got it. Got it. That's interesting. And this may seem self-serving, but how are you analyzing? So coachability, I assume you're covering in your discovery with the business owner. And how are you, when you look at the business, how are you ascertaining whether or not that it has the foundation that will lead to? Because if I hear you correctly, Steve, you're saying, we really engage with clients where we are confident that we can deliver for them. And I know that's important to your business model, which we could get into. But how do you ascertain whether or not the business has what you're looking for?
Okay, so the first thing, so we offer a program to business owners, which is fairly holistic, start to finish. And I think that's important to them, because we present to them a roadmap of what we're actually going to do for them from start to finish. And most of our clients have a transition objective at the end of a period of time. They may not be set on a transition at the time where we enter into the contract, but they're probably of an age where a transition is likely or possible over a 5-year time frame. So we certainly do that. The start of that process, the holistic process that I referred to, is we enter into a 30-day agreement with the owner, whereby we do a discovery. Fundamental to that discovery process is an evaluation of strategic capacity, and growth drive is a core component of our discovery process. And one of the outputs to that is that we evaluate where the business sits today in the 3 dimensions of growth. So that would be the first thing. But critically, we roll on top of growth drive, the growth drive output, our experience as operators, from a financial, from a sales, from a strategy, from a marketing perspective. We insist actually with the business owner that we speak to all of the key people in the business, and that would typically be anywhere from 3 to 6 or 7 people. We have a 1-hour interview with each of them, and we want to hear a number of things. We want to hear What does that person do in the business? What is their job? What is their perspective on the business? And how do they add value to the business themselves? So when we've had those conversations and we take detailed notes and we summarize the output from those meetings, we line it up with the results of Growth Drive, and we triangulate and put a presentation together after 30 days for the business owner on what we believe the core value drivers are in the business, and perhaps how we suggest they go about improving those value drivers in a hierarchy of prospective pieces of work. So that's what we do, George. We do a discovery, and we feed back to the business owner what we believe they have today, and we do put them in the range of value as well. Growth Drive helps us do that. And so we figure out whether, based on what we see, whether we can materially add value to the business owner. And when I say materially add value, we're really looking at prospects where we strongly believe we can double or triple the value over a 3 to 5 year period. So it is material, the effect of the work that we do with them.
That's interesting. What I want to pick up on something that's kind of implied that you just said. So you have, as part of your qualifying, it seems that you have determined that this business owner or CEO is willing to be transparent and is willing to have you. It's almost one of your qualifying criteria that you're going to be able to have access to their senior team, and a nice chunk of time, an hour with each of them. And I agree with you that's critical. If they don't have the attitude, if they're not going to let you speak with their team, then we can still help. But in your experience, that limits the chances of success. Is that a good read?
It's a totally good read, and you're right. It is a qualifying criteria, because we strongly believe that people of all levels in the organization, I truly mean that too, have a view, and they have somewhat of a potential good view. They're the eyes on the ground as to what the operating issues are, and we want to hear that. And specifically, we want the unvarnished view, and that's why we speak to the key individuals, the go-to people in the organization. And we want to hear the unvarnished, and that is a confidential discussion. We make that clear with each of the people. And an interesting question that we always ask last within those interviews is, okay, so we've asked you a bunch of questions, but is there any information that you have that we haven't asked you about that you feel we should know about? And you'll be amazed, or we're constantly amazed at the response that we get. The last question we ask, we're constantly amazed at the value that we get from that question. So we want to hear the unvarnished. We absolutely want to hear that, and we want to hear it from all different angles, and that could be top to bottom. So we do. It is a qualifying criteria for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting because if I heard you correctly, you're saying, the fact that you have a title written over your door and on your business card is great, but you want to go to you said the go-to person. So if we have a manufacturing company and we want to understand the machining process down on the shop floor, you're going to go down to the shop floor and talk to that, whoever is in charge of those functions, regardless of their title. Do I have that right?
Totally.
Absolutely. Yeah, I absolutely. That's fantastic. Well, thanks for setting that up. Are there specific, so you just described qualifying and moving in with a client. Is there a specific case back in your history or recently where applying the discovery and the initial analysis, you've just described your first 30 days, where that has led to what has that led to in your experience? I guess I could leave that question a little more open.
I think looking back on what it leads to is particularly with the experienced eyes of people with, each of our partners have got 30 years plus experience in of leading companies, being president or CEO, or being a functional expert with brand names or smaller companies. I think what that does is it allows us to ask and probe for often sometimes we get evasive answers, but if we can keep probing on a particular point of view with an interview technique which gets to the real nub of the issue, then I think that's important. But if you look back on what we achieve, the discovery report that we give, and it's typically a PowerPoint that is projecting a number of observations on the business, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, and so on. We typically have somewhere between 12 and 18 observations that are material. And I would say that looking back, I think that many of the we understand most of the value in a company from that 30 days of due diligence, and I think that puts us in a great position to recommend a way forward in terms of how to proceed on building value.
Got it. And you had mentioned earlier that you're looking specifically, one of your qualifying criteria is someone. I didn't hear you say that you're looking for businesses that are anticipating a transfer of ownership, a sale and exit, but it sounds as though someone who's in the age class, that they're starting to think about what that would look like. What are my options, 5-10 years from now? And those are the companies with which you want to get involved. So you 30 days of discovery, when you get in and you're finding the links, the levers to pull. You're identifying the levers to pull to increase the value of the business. How does that play into how Rizolve Partners? You tend to have long-term relationships with your clients, right? What's the average engagement time?
The average engagement time is 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
It could be. So the roadmap that we present a business owner is really one of a strategic view over 3 to 5 years for the organization. Mm-hmm. An improvement exercise, which can be 3, 4, 5 years, and what that's really leading to is fundamentally a decision point on behalf of the business owner. In other words, we improve value, we improve the operating systems, the intangible assets in the business, and so on. We clear roadblocks, and we create a solid base for growth, such that when the foot goes on the accelerator by the business owner, the business is prepared to take on that growth. But what we do is we get to a point where it gets to most of our work is complete, and he or she can then decide whether at that point whether they love what they see and they want to continue on a growth path. That's perfectly fine for us. Or whether it's time to cash in some of the chips, either partially or fully, and move on to the next act. So really what it is 3 dimensions of growth, focusing on those value drivers, improving the strategic capacity to build profits and cash flow. And getting to the point where and typically with the age profile, you know, something's happening at that kind of age. It's either death, divorce, or disagreement, or disability. Something's happening in people's life at 65 to 70. It starts to happen. And, grandchildren come along, things that weren't important start to become important. And along the way, that decision point changes perspective. And so we want to be there for the business owner to move them through a transition if that's the way they want to go. But we're happy with either.
Yeah, I love that. I love that in your model, because your model starts with with discovery, with qualifying, with the 30-day deep analysis of the business. And then you tend to work with, if the CEO says, yeah, I like what I'm seeing, you work with them over the course of years. And your business model actually anticipates, and I love the patience that's built into your model. But your model anticipates that the business will one day go through a transfer of value.
Yes.
And could you comment on that?
Well, I'll just so for sure. I will say that staying so I always make a distinction with business owners, and it's often misunderstood. We make the distinction that what Rizolve are as professionals are business advisors and not consultants.
Yeah.
We may do some consulting along the way, but fundamentally, we're not there to do all of the work. We're there to advise and guide on value creating initiatives. And so we bring a holistic view, a strategic view to the table, which often isn't there. And that's our value. We may do some of the work if the resources in the company are light in that respect, or not sufficient, and so on. So we're not consultants, we're advisors, and that's an important distinction, because we want the business owner, if they're embedded in the business, if the business is somewhat owner dependent, we need them to work on the business, not in it. And so we counsel the business owner to put together a strong leadership team that's going to enable that situation. That's a value driving initiative immediately. If nothing else, stopping it being a value destroying initiative. And obviously building a strong independent management team that can carry a plan forward is absolutely value driving.
Absolutely.
So that's what we do.
Yeah, and I like your distinction between, and it's something we teach in our courses, distinction between being an advisor and being a consultant. And would this be an accurate summary? An advisor is a strategic role, a strategic advisor that's providing guidance at the top level, and a consultant is someone who's providing tactical, subject matter specific, even work, being a wrench turner sometimes inside the business. Is that a fair distinction?
You explain it far better than I can, George.
I'm glad. So, hey, Steve, I wanted to ask, shifting gears a little bit, what are some of the common challenges you see out there in, not so much in engaging clients, but once you're involved in the client, can you comment on a couple of the challenges that you see more often than not in your engagements?
For sure. In the lower mid-market, there is typically an absence of planning discipline. There may be an annual budget in place, which would be great. We love to see that starting out. If there's an annual budget, it's typically not a written plan. But there is certainly an absence of a strategic viewpoint. So that would be number one, the planning discipline. Number two would be In the lower mid-market, there is scarce resources, particularly on the human resources side. There is absolutely scarcity with regard to strategic thinking and the formalization of that. So that would be number two. Often there are leadership issues from the point of view of the human resources in the business, and so often leadership is something where we have to start. In addition to creating the strategic vision for the organization. So those two things are definitely important, and where we'd start. Now, to put a strategic plan together is tough for a resource constrained firm. So we do act more like a consultant to start with on the strategic planning side, because they just need pairs of hands to be able to put that together. But the value that we bring to the table is being able to organize a very well thought out set of strategic questions that the group can answer, and pulling together the output from that process. It's typically a 2-day offsite, but we help them put the strategic plan together. That's fraught with risk, because we really want the team to own the plan. So we work hard to make sure that even if we put the plan together for them, that they are absolutely central to the creation of that, and that they absolutely approve what we've done. But one of the key differentiators of what we do for a business owner is, having put the plan together, we work alongside the owner and the team in order to hold them accountable to the things that they said that they were going to do. And our clients really like the fact that we don't come in, tell them the way it is, and then walk away having put a report on the table. We actually help them through their challenges of implementation over a 3 to 5 year period, and they really like that. They really want that support and help.
Sure. Yeah, I'm not surprised. And what may surprise some of the audience is that would it be fair to say that you're seeing this, the senior team dysfunction, if I can call it that, is present in a 5 million gross business, but it's also often present in much larger organizations, 30, 40, 50 million a year. Does that hold up in your world?
That absolutely holds up.
Yeah.
It manifests itself in different ways. And the challenge for the advisor is to be nimble, to be able to react to the different circumstances. But it is absolutely the case that there are strengths and weaknesses in the management team that could do with some work, for sure.
Yeah, that's an entire topic for another day, because you and I could talk about that for the rest of the morning. Awesome, Steve. Thank you very much. Well, we're getting close on time. Just some closing thoughts. If you just a free form thoughts that you'd be willing to share with our listeners about what you're seeing out there, general terms, specific. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are.
Well, I won't repeat what I've already said. Some other things that we see, particularly in the lower mid market, is that often human resource functions are weak. There's often not professional leadership in those size of companies. If there is, then that's a definite value driver for the organization. So human resources for sure. The other thing that we often find is that the sales processes are operating but underdeveloped, particularly with regard to the formalization of the funnel, and movement and discipline through the funnel. So I would say that the sales process and organization, I'm thinking also of compensation and incentives for the sales organization. That's often a weak area. Human resources for sure, leadership potentially, so they would be three areas. And then, of course, always with a growing company, goes without saying, there are always weaknesses on operations, always. But those weaknesses are not necessarily, they're always an improvement opportunity. But the big ones are often the previous three that I talked about. And you're always going to have pressure points in a growing organization: scarcity of labor, scarcity of skills, and a lack of training and development for the young people. So that would be three or four areas where that we often see that we have to work on first. One other area which is really important is data analytics. We often see and we truly believe that data analytics, sophisticated data analytics, using the data cube an organization has often built, can be a fountain of valuable information. And so making the data analytics side of the business more robust is a key value driver often.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And throughout the growth drive system, we talk about data. Do you have data to prove it? Because we're trying to drive people precisely to what you just hit on. It strikes me that the areas you've described actually fit neatly into, where you're starting your engagement and seeing the early wins are squarely in dimension one, with sales process, with people, productive and loyal, effective senior leadership team, standard operating procedures so that we can deliver on the promises made to the market by sales. All of those are first dimension launchpad. In the growth drive vernacular, those are the launch pad for growth. I think it's interesting that you've hit on them, and it kind of validates. You just did a freeform validation of our perspective on the world. So thanks. That was terrific, Steve. I really appreciate your time. I'm always fascinated. You and I have such great conversations, and this has been yet another good one. So I wanted to say thank you very much. Thanks for your time this morning, and any closing comments before we wrap up?
Well, I'd just say to the people listening here that there are a lot of business owners out there that need your help. The trick is finding the ones that you can work with closely in a positive spirit, who have resources to apply to a situation. But there's a lot of people, a lot of business owners who need your help, particularly the baby boomer community that worked all their life on their life's work, value growth ahead of a transition is an important strategic objective, and you can help them in that regard for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have you back on to talk about workshops and some of the ways in which you're connecting, you're helping business owners and CEOs identify into the Rizolve world, which is another fascinating topic, and something you and I have discussed at length. In fact, on which you just presented down at our summit. Thanks again. Okay, Steve, listen, we're going to wrap it up for today. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your time, and I definitely would love to have you back to talk about some of the other work you do. Maybe focus on those workshops.
My pleasure. Thank you.